Donald Trump is being targeted because of who he is. If he was not running for president again, I don't think you'd see any of this barrage of prosecution. You have to understand this is something that would undermine a very foundational principle of our country. The people have to trust that the justice system is fair, that there really is equal justice under law. And if we don't have that, we lose something very important to maintain a constitutional republic.
This week on the Hill, Salem News Channel, Speaker Mike Johnson talks about what he saw as he visited the Manhattan courtroom this week, where Donald Trump continues to face a criminal trial.
Donald Trump is being targeted because of who he is. If he was not running for president again, I don't think you'd see any of this barrage of prosecutions, these local district attorneys and state attorneys who are after him. Even the federal Department of Justice is after him through special counsel Jack Smith. They have targeted him because he is soon to be officially the nominee of the Republican Party for president. And this is their only way to stop him. I think they assessed that some time back. And so everybody around the country can see this for what it is. Anybody who looks at what is happening objectively has to reach the same conclusion. They are targeting him because of who he is. And the real threat to this, Tony, is it is the weaponization of our system of justice itself. And as I explained in that presser outside the courthouse in Manhattan yesterday or earlier this week, you have to understand this is something that would undermine a very foundational principle of our country. The people have to trust that the justice system is fair, that there really is equal justice under law. And if we don't have that, we lose something very important to maintain a constitutional republic.
Greg, how important was it to see Speaker Johnson and Governor Doug Burgum and Congressman Byron Donalds and Senator J.D. Vance? I mean, it was a whole parade of Republicans going up on the Acela corridor there to stand with Donald Trump, literally, and then also speak on his behalf to the media, since Donald Trump's not allowed to.
No, it's really important that they did that because, as you say, Donald Trump is literally prevented by this judge from calling out the political motivations behind this prosecution. And the whole prosecution is a total joke. And so, yeah, it was very important for Speaker Johnson and all the Republican members of Congress to be there and to stand with the Republican nominee for president who's being targeted by this weaponized system. And, you know, it was funny to see the liberals in the media melt down over the fact that Speaker Johnson did this. They said, oh, how dare this powerful politician go to New York City and weigh in on an ongoing criminal trial, as if powerful politicians haven't weighed in on ongoing trials before. So, I mean, Donald Trump is the nominee and he is being targeted, and it's really important that every Republican stand with him.
In fact, it wasn't just liberals in the media. Mitt Romney also, Andy, said that it was unseemly for these members of Congress to do this. He said it undermined the judicial system. I don't know. For me, I question any Republican who doesn't speak out about this. What's undermining the judicial system, I think, is the misuse of it in this case.
Larry, they should rent a bus from D.C. and take it down to New York, full of Republicans piling into that courtroom and supporting former President Trump. We all know what this is about. This is about, hopefully, the Democrats in their mind get a conviction so Joe Biden can run around for the rest of the election season and say, convicted felon, and former President Donald Trump, convicted felon. They just want to apply that moniker, that tag to him. They're going to try and disgrace him. They're going to try and humiliate him. They're going to continue their attempts to muddy his name and call him a convicted felon every time they possibly can. When Biden, whenever he comes out from under, from under his rock, I was going to say, but really whenever he comes out from his basement to campaign. That's what this is all about. It was great to see high-level Republican leadership supporting the former president.
Sarah, you're pretty recent from working on the Hill. Recently been up there. Is it as chaotic as it seems at times? Because this week they actually sort of, at least in this case, showed themselves to be somewhat organized and on message and actually doing something that was politically effective.
I agree with that. I mean, working on the Hill is one thing, but being in the Freedom Caucus world is another. I was part of the Freedom Caucus comms world for about 4 years. And so seeing all of these people actually getting it together, they do their best. They do their best, but it's great to see that this is an actual movement and there's a steady wave of members of Congress and political figures going to support Donald Trump in person. Yeah. And plus the fact that they can even get all of the schedulers to get the the train schedule right is always really promising, but
Exactly.
logistics.
They actually made the train on time and actually got up there. That's a logistics
Exactly.
nightmare sometimes. Well, while you're talking about it, and since you're a comms expert, the other story that was happening in the background of the show of Solidarity up in Manhattan was Joe Biden finally accepting Donald Trump's challenge to debate. Do you see that, Sarah, as a sign of desperation that they know that they're starting to lose it here?
Absolutely. I mean, if you take 5 minutes to look at the terms and conditions of what the Joe Biden team forced CNN to do for this debate, it's absolutely insane. The fact that they have to have their mics turned off immediately after they're done speaking. Honestly, I would just like to see Joe Biden sticking with the counter for how long they're actually able to speak. It's going to be a mess. There's not going to be a live audience. And they're just doing everything they can to make him look like he can actually fight when all he can do is barely read a teleprompter pause.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. And read the pause on the teleprompter.
Exactly.
Andy, great Ron Burgundy, without the charm. Andy, I don't think it's going to happen. I think what they're going to keep layering these demands on there, and Trump may ask for one or two things, and then Biden's going to be like, "Oh, forget it, that's it. We tried. It's not going to." Because they can't let him up there on stage, can they?
No, they can't. But I hope and I pray that it does happen. I'm a little concerned that these, and I agree with you, Larry, they're going to continue to layer demand after demand after demand, and then take a step back and say, hey, we did everything we could. The convicted felon and former president, Donald Trump, is being unreasonable. I hope it happens. I wish it would happen in October. They're doing this in June. Potentially in September. I've read commentary, and as everybody else here has, about perhaps they're doing this so early, so if he stumbles, he can be replaced with time to spare to campaign.
Greg, what do you think? Is this debate going to happen? I mean, we're in the business of content, and I want it to happen too, because that's a content creator's dream to have the debate to work with.
I think it's going to happen because, as Sarah said, they had to put all of these demands on there in order for Joe Biden to actually be able to do it. Of course, they're not going to debate Donald Trump in a large venue with a raucous crowd, with some semi-neutral people moderating it. Instead, they're going to CNN without a live audience, with Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, two of the biggest liberal hacks in the mainstream media, who can cut off Donald Trump's mic whenever they want. Like, Donald Trump, if this debate happens, he's basically walking into Bryant-Denny Stadium as the away team. Like, he's going to be, you have these people who are able to shut off his mic, and it's not the type of environment that Donald Trump normally excels in. And with all these, the insanely controlled environment that it's going to be, Joe Biden will definitely have the advantage.
Yep, I agree. It's not a debate. It's two guys repeating memorized 2-minute lines at a podium, one at a time. That's hardly a debate. Let's go back to Speaker Johnson on This Week on the Hill, Salem News Channel, because he also commented on some other problems that are going on with our legal system. Take a look.
This week, a pro-life activist, Lauren Handy, was sentenced to 57 months in prison, nearly 5 years for peacefully protesting outside a D.C. abortion clinic. Now, Handy was charged by the Biden Justice Department for violating the 1994 Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which they began enforcing aggressively after the overturn of Roe. Is this not an example of that weaponization that you talked about?
Completely. It's an upside down, instance of priorities being exactly in the wrong place. They're aggressively prosecuting people who are exercising their First Amendment freedom to talk about the sanctity of human life on a public sidewalk. And meanwhile, they catch and release dangerous criminals, persons who come across the border illegally, and people who are violent offenders multiple times over. These district attorneys and even the federal Department of Justice have turned a blind eye to so much of that, and yet they're targeting people that have a different political viewpoint. I just think it's such a blatant example of exactly what we're talking about. And the people see this. They see a two-tiered system of justice, and that's a real threat to us. Because if people, Tony, at the end of the day, if people see that this is what is going on, they lose their faith in the justice system itself. And then they just determine, what's the point? I'll resolve my disputes on my own. I mean, that's how you lead into chaos, and that's how you lose a culture, and that's what's happening right now.
Yeah. So, Andy, I'm told by Democrats that abortion is on the ticket this November and they're going to play this up as much as possible. They may be right that abortion's on the ticket, but with stories like that, where a pro-life activist who were just praying outside of one of these abortion mills gets thrown into jail for 5 years, that actually might come back to harm Democrats. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. AMAC is an organization that supports life from the moment of conception to natural death. That we are unashamed to say that. It's in our mission statement, and we're proud to be supporters of life. So that said, yeah, abortion could be on the ballot, but when they run stories like this and when they act and they weaponize the Department of Justice, I think the most important thing that Speaker Johnson said was we when they weaponize the Department of Justice, it causes people to lose faith in our institutions, in our centuries-long institutions, and it causes chaos. But people are also smart enough to see, and they know the difference between a peaceful protest and then what happened 4 years ago with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, when you had mainstream media people standing in front of burning buildings calling this is a mostly peaceful protest. People know the difference, and they realize that what's happening to that poor person who's sentenced to almost 5 years for peacefully protesting on behalf of life is quite different than when they burned cities like Louisville for Breonna Taylor and other cities throughout the country in the George Floyd protests. And where are the consequences for the people who participated in those violent protests over the summer? Where are the consequences for the people that are participating in those violent protests on college campuses? People are smart enough, voters are smart enough to compare and contrast what's going on.
Yeah, Andy makes a great point, Sarah. The messaging is palpable. Just last week, we saw these anti-Semitic and violent protests on college campuses. People get a slap on the wrist, maybe detained and then released. But meanwhile, this guy praying a rosary gets thrown in the clink.
It's disgusting. The best thing that could have happened from all of this with the Trump convictions, the prosecution against conservatives, is that we realized as a unit just how dangerous the Democrats are with weaponizing the DOJ. They could come after Trump. They could come after you. And in this case specifically, you see that because you're a political opponent on a big ticket issue, they're willing to do whatever they can to prove their point.
We'll let that be the last word. Thank you, Sarah.